Greetings and welcome to another lecture in Introductory Psychology. Although given the subject and the rather provocative, if long, title, I actually may wind up having a lot of people watching this, because how to get information into memory is not only a concern of students, but it's pretty much a concern of most everybody. And I gotta tell you something, y'all. Most of you are probably doing it wrong. Unfortunately, the techniques that most people learn to memorize things are not the ways that work. Not without a whole lot of struggle and a lot more failure. So, to get the information into memory, psychologists have stolen the term rehearsal. Because psychologists have this belief that if there's a perfectly good term for something that exists in another field of study, they're just going to appropriate that. Particularly cognitive psychologists like to do that, psychologists that think about memory in the mind and such like. And so they appropriated this particular term from the performing arts. And if you've ever learned music of any kind pretty much, or dance, or drama, then you know what rehearsal is. And if you haven't, you've probably seen a movie. Rehearsal is when you go over it and over it and over it and practice and practice and practice until you reach perfection, or at least as close to it as you can get. And so when psychologists talk about getting memory into memory, they call it rehearsal. There's actually two types of rehearsal. The first is the type that most people do, and it is unfortunately the type that only works well for one specific thing, which is not what we're actually using it for. It's called maintenance rehearsal. Now, again, these things tend to be named exactly what they are. And what maintenance rehearsal does best is it keeps information, it maintains information in a level of storage called short-term memory. Short-term memory is exactly what it sounds like. It's memory that lasts a short term, about 20 to 30 seconds. It also holds a limited amount. I have another lecture about levels of storage if you want to go watch that if you haven't. And what maintenance rehearsal does is it helps keep information into short-term memory longer perhaps than a short term. Maintenance rehearsal consists of repeating something over and over and over and over and over again. Okay? And in fact, in terms of memory, maintenance rehearsal is pretty much auditory. Okay? You say something over and over and over again. This is how the vast majority of people seem to study. You have a definition. Okay? So you want to remember maintenance rehearsal, you go maintenance rehearsal, maintenance rehearsal, maintenance rehearsal, maintenance rehearsal. Okay, keeps information short-term memory, keeps information short-term memory, keeps information short-term memory, that's maintenance rehearsal. And saying something over and over and over again will indeed keep something in your short-term memory. But if you've ever used that to memorize something permanently, to put things into long-term memory, you've probably realized that it doesn't work very well. Because generally what happens is you say, keeps information short-term memory, keeps information short-term memory, keeps information short-term memory, keeps information short-term memory, right? You say that to yourself for however long you think is necessary, and then you move on to the next thing. Mostly auditory, mostly auditory, mostly auditory, mostly auditory, mostly auditory, mostly auditory. And then you find that you've forgotten that it keeps information in short-term memory. You've forgotten the name of it. That's because maintenance rehearsal does not work well at all at getting information into that permanent storage, which is what we're using it for. Our brain doesn't work that way. Okay? Our long-term memory, our permanent storage, works in paraphrase. It does not like to remember things word for word. And when you do remember things word for word very often, all you're remembering are the look of the words or the sound of the words. And I gotta tell you that even if you can cram something into your brain using maintenance rehearsal and you manage to put it in your long-term store, the odds are once it's there, all you're going to be able to do is remember it. Which may sound like enough, and it may have been enough in high school, but unfortunately in college, generally, we want students to do more than simply remember the information, or be able to pick it out of a lineup, which we call a multiple choice test. Okay, that one looks familiar, it must be right. No, we expect you to use the information. And unfortunately, if you use maintenance rehearsal to get information into your long-term memory, there's a number of flaws. Well, the first flaw, of course, is it doesn't work very well. It takes a long time to work. The second flaw is, since you put it in word for word, the only way that it can come out is word for word. When we try to remember something, we use what are called retrieval cues. C-U-E-S. We use retrieval cues, like a cue in the theater. That's your cue, you need to go in. Okay? Well, the retrieval cue basically is like putting a word into a search engine. You're going to Google something. You type the word in, Google pulls up the information related to that word, which is delightful if you're working with Google or Bing or any of the other search engines. But unfortunately, with our brain, we can't retrieve things exactly the way we put them in. That's not how our long-term memory works. And so you may, for instance, wind up with a question that asks you to use the information. That's not going to help you retrieve it. That's not going to help you remember it. And once you do remember it, if all you've memorized are the sounds or all you've memorized are the words, not going to be able to understand it. You're not going to be able to apply it, and you're going to wind up in trouble. On my test, for instance, I will very often wind up, I do multiple choice tests, sure, but I use different words that mean the same thing on the possible answers. So instead of saying it keeps information in short-term memory, that being one of the possible answers, I might say that, what is maintenance rehearsal? And one of the answers is, well, it allows us to put information into our memory for maybe 20 or 30 seconds. And then maybe keep it in longer than 20 or 30 seconds. That's got nothing. I didn't know if I even used any of the same words. And so therefore memorizing with maintenance rehearsal keeps information in memory. That's not going to help you. So it not only is difficult to retrieve because it has to come out the exact same way you came in. You have to use the exact same retrieval cue. It's part of the reason, by the way, when someone has memorized a speech and they can't remember the next line, if you give them the first word, oftentimes, boom, they'll be able to know it. But this isn't a drama class. I'm not expecting you to be able to recite something. I'm expecting you to be able to understand it and to be able to use it and to be able to think about it. I had a student once. This student could memorize like a tape recorder. I was impressed. It was on some level perhaps an eidetic memory. Eidetic, E-I-D-E-T-I-C. That is something that when you see it once, it's what we call a photographic memory. You see it once, you got it. The problem with eidetic memories is that just because you have it in your head doesn't mean you understand it. And so he was failing the test. He was failing, the class, and he came to see me. And one of the first things I do when students come to see me is I quiz them, so I find out, what they know, where the problem might lie. Maybe it's a testing problem, for instance. And I said to him, okay, what's maintenance rehearsal? He said, maintenance rehearsal keeps out information in short-term memory. I said, okay, what does that mean? He hadn't the slightest. All he knew were the words. The words will get you nowhere in college, or pretty much anywhere except for certain types of multiple choice tests. The odds are you're not going to run into these tests in college or university. Okay? Maintenance rehearsal is not good at all at getting information into long-term memory. What is good is what's called elaborative rehearsal. Now, when you elaborate on something, you don't simply say it over and over and over again. You bring in examples. For instance, you might say, well, maintenance rehearsal. Maintenance rehearsal, it's when I'm trying to remember a phone number and I say it over and over and over again. And I keep it short, and then when I stop saying it over and over again, it's gone because it only keeps it in there for a short period of time. That's elaborative rehearsal. Bring in your own examples. Bring in your own definitions. Put things in your own words. Because elaborative rehearsal is fantastic at putting information into your long-term memory, into your permanent store. Because that's how our brain works in the first place. Our brain wants to put things in its own words. We'll do it. Which is going to be very scary for a lot of you, because a lot of you, particularly in high school, would memorize things word for word because that was exactly how your teacher wanted it and that was exactly how it was going to be on the test and I have to do it word. No, welcome to college. Don't memorize word for word. Simply be able to understand these, be able to explain them. If you can explain them to someone else, explanation is elaborative rehearsal, which is why I ask my students to do that for me when they come in and they say they're having problems, because I want to know if they're using elaborative rehearsal or they're using maintenance. So elaborative rehearsal is not only how our brain actually works, it also gives us more than one retrieval cue. With maintenance rehearsal, you have to use the exact same retrieval cue essentially to get it out as you did to put it in. Elaborative rehearsal works on what we like to call deeper processing. There's very shallow processing, right there at the surface, which is the look of words or the sound of words. Deeper processes involve things like meaning of words. And if you use elaborative rehearsal, If you remember maintenance rehearsal, you say that whole thing about, oh yeah, I say something over and over again and it keeps it in, then I stop thinking about it. Then when I give you a question that uses different words for the definition, or asks you to pick out an example of of maintenance rehearsal, you'll be able to do that because you're not just memorizing the words. You know the ideas, you know what they mean, and you'll be able to apply them no problem at all. Elaborative rehearsal is the way to go. Put it in your own words. It's how your brain works. It gives you more retrieval cues to remember this later. It allows you to process this in a deeper way, which allows you to understand it, which is what college and university are all about. And yes, it is a bit frightening. By the way, if you are in a drama class and you have to memorize something word for word, then ignore this. But unless you're memorizing a speech, elaborative rehearsal is the way to go. Like I said, it's how your brain works anyway. And in college, it's nice to be able to basically be told, work with your brain, not against it. Maintenance rehearsal, trying to get stuff into long-term, works against how your brain works, and it's quite difficult. Elaborative rehearsal, we do this every day. You experience something, or you want to tell me about a movie you saw, you're going to use your own words. You're not going to use the reviewer's words. You're not going to use the words of the movie. You're going to use your own. That's how your brain works. So when you study for any class, like I said, unless it's a speech class or a drama class, use elaborative rehearsal. Interestingly enough, with elaborative rehearsal, with maintenance rehearsal, you have to go over it and over it and over it, hours and hours and hours and hours and hours of studying. Elaborative rehearsal, sometimes it's just a couple of times. And then review it a little bit later to make sure you still have the right words. So for this class and for other classes, my recommendation is use elaborative rehearsal, put it in your own words, bring in your own examples, work the way your brain works. Work with your brain and not against it.